And we have, as we do every Monday at this time, the Sheriff Sit-Down brought to you by our Community Credit Union. We have Sheriff Casey Salisbury joining us, along with Chief Deputy Ryan Spurling. Hey, guys, what's going on today?
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Good seeing you, too. Sorry, I'm kind of looking at the board here, looking at you guys.
You're looking good over there.
Thank you. Turn this camera off, please. I told you guys to shut that one down. Okay, so you guys, we have a lot of stuff to talk about. We're a week away from Labor Day Monday. We've got boating safety to talk about. The weather's getting warmer. It's going to be 90 tomorrow. So a lot of people on the waterways and stuff. Let's start with that maybe and go over some stats. So you guys have some stats you want to go over?
Yeah, we'll talk about some stats. Typically, at least in my experience when I used to work the road, Labor Day weekend's a tough one to work. People from the west side are coming back from the east side from their last hoorah before the school year starts. People from the east side are going back to their side. I mean, everybody's crossing the mountains and going home. And bad traffic, it's hot. People have been all weekend, and a lot of tensions, and as well as a lot of people have boats in the water and camping and those kind of things. So it's a tough weekend, and then after that it starts the downhill slide as school starts to go back in, things start to settle down. But it's a pretty rough weekend. That's when the
drinking really starts, when kids start going back to school. The parents freaking out.
Yeah. So
the hot temperatures and the stress of the first day of
crime
school.
Stats. The chief will talk about our crime stats and where we're at on some things, and then again this weekend coming up, we ask just people to be, very, very mindful. Everybody's going to be on the water, and everybody's going to be calling for a deputy, and there's very few available with all the other things. And just please be patient and mindful, and keep yourself safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we go over some of those stats? How are things looking for Mason County?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic, but we in law enforcement get in law enforcement to be able to help people and be able to serve, and it kills us sometimes when we just don't have the resources to be able to respond to good citizens who have legitimate complaints, but we have to prioritize. Just to give a little bit of a picture, and something we've said before, but we want to make sure people understand. We've got almost 1,000 square miles that we have to cover.
Wow.
We have 300 miles of saltwater waterfront and 200 lakes. We have the Olympic National Park and the forest up there with a lot of people recreating. We're surrounded by 1.3 million people on all these different counties, and a lot of them come here on these big weekends to recreate, to get on the Hood Canal, to get on the Puget Sound, to fish, to get in the mountains, to hike, those type of things. And we are limited on resources. The 2017-18 budget cuts, we lost 15 positions.
Wow,
and
that's a lot.
Just to go over some of the statistics over the years, in 2015, our office covered 18,600 calls for service. 1 year later, we went up by over 1,000. We went over 19,775. 2017, we went up to 20,000 calls for service. Last year, we had a significant jump, and that was with 15 less positions. We were at 24,472 calls for service, and we're on track to be at the same amount. That's 911 calls, or calls for service to ask for a deputy to respond, and we're doing it with 32 positions.
Wow.
32 deputies covering 365, 24/7, and right now, because of the big retirement push that we had last year, we had quite a few senior people that retired. We have 7 of those 32 in training, so they're not on the streets.
Wow. How long does that take?
Well, from the time you hire them, you have to go through an outside service, so that civil service gives us a list. Once we get the list, we have to go through an interview. If they pass the interview, then we go through a background, which is very extensive. If they pass the background and they go to the next phase, then they have to go through a polygraph, a psychological evaluation, and a medical evaluation. Then, if they make it through that, then we hire them. Then we have to apply for a position at the academy, and we wait. And right now, the Criminal Justice Training Center takes quite a while. Sometimes it's 5-6 months to wait to get into the academy. Once they go to the academy, it's a 5-month process. And then once they get out, it's 3 months of sitting in the car with another deputy evaluating their ability to do the job. So it's a year to a year and a half to get them on the streets.
Wow.
So we're running a little short. An example of some of the short, how it will affect us. Last year, our detectives covered almost 500 cases where they investigated all the way through. They're doing that with 7 detectives.
7?
7 detectives, 500 major cases that they're having to do follow-up on. And we're having to prioritize. So just really encouraging people to be patient. Some days we're not getting inundated with calls and we'll be able to make it to everything. Other days when we're just getting hammered, because sometimes we're anywhere from 60 to 120 calls for service just for our agency a day.
Wow, that's a lot.
And that's a lot to respond to, and we really want to respond. We want to assist people, but I've also directed our sergeants to make sure you prioritize. Obviously, an assault with a weapon is going to be priority over a barking dog. You know, those type of things we have to
As
make
we spoke to this, a long time ago, our concern was, and our plea was, and theory was that if we lost deputies' positions, that it would not only be more difficult to cover the calls, but we anticipated that calls would go up because people know that it's just not the law enforcement that there was. And every time we lose positions or aren't keeping up with our neighboring counties, the crime seems to come to you if you're not keeping up with those numbers of positions. And so it's been a real challenge with 15 down, and notice that was one of the most significant increases in history in the number of calls for service.
I love when there's still light in the sky at 10 o'clock at night, not so much when it's going to get dark at 4:30 or 5 in the afternoon, but what does that do? We talk about like productivity and things like that when we look at the time changes, but this time of year as it's getting darker and darker earlier and earlier, what does that do to calls and to crime in the area? Is it preferable to have the longer days, or does that mean do people get into trouble earlier when it gets darker? How does that work, and how does that affect?
It seems like the weather works the same for everybody. Once it starts pouring down, raining, it seems that things calm down. Nobody wants to be out in the rain.
I'm going to rob that place, but the weather's too bad.
Yeah, the weather's bad today. and the dark hours of darkness and things. I think one of the big changes that we try to anticipate every year and warn, and we start early. You'll start seeing as the days get shorter, and especially as we go into the time changes, you're going to see a lot of headlights and taillights out. And we worry about that because we start seeing kids stand on the side of the road here in the next couple of weeks, ready for school, and trying to get people to be mindful that the kids are moving about more frequently, standing next to the edges of the roads, and asking people to please be mindful of that and keep your speeds down. It becomes a real dangerous time, and the school buses are all starting to move around, and your morning routine changes, and people get antsy and want to pass school buses and things like that, and it gets very dangerous. And we just ask for voluntary compliance on that as well.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, always good to have you. Appreciate it. Stay safe out there, and we'll talk with you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good job. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. And we'll talk skydiving another time when my heart isn't already in my throat. Anyway, Sheriff Casey Salisbury, Chief Deputy Ryan Spurling joining us for the Sheriff Sit Down, brought to you by our Community Credit Union.